Hello, everyone, and welcome to the eighth episode of Matukate. And today, with me, we have a budding international relations and foreign policy conflict analyst. He has graduated from the London School of Economics with a MSc in International Relations. His writings have regularly been featured in the Statesman newspaper and other digital and print publications, and is also my good friend. Welcome to the podcast, Aditya. How are
Thank
you
you,
doing?
Manish. I'm doing good. I hope you're doing the same as well. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It's my pleasure to be here.
And since you agreed to come on the podcast, I was very
Right.
excited to ask you this. How has COVID impacted China's
Right.
global order?
It's a burning situation right now. I mean, it's a burning question to a lot of people I've been asking, and it's a huge debate that's happening. Like 21st century was presumed to be the Asian century, especially with China and India taking the lead. But with the onset of COVID-19, and there's always been a bit of skepticism over China's rise, starting from 2002 or 2003, where its economy was like reaching the boom. And with the COVID situation, there's been a lot of speculations and you say like an emerging anti-Chinese sentiments to some extent within the West and within the other emerging powers. So I think that is gonna impact the Chinese global order to some extent, be it like emotionally or just say in a normative sense rather than in a very material aspects wise. So I don't see this impacting China's economy to a great extent or its sphere of influence, because its sphere of influence has always been with the smaller nations, say Sri Lanka, or say relatively Pakistan, or Nepal, or other African countries where investments have generally been gradually low from the West, and this was filled with Chinese investments as a substitute. So I think its influence is going to stay there for a bit. But yeah, there is going to be a bit of anti-Chinese sentiments, especially in the West and the other emerging powers, including India. But it's gonna still hold intact with its anti-Western world order, or just say a Chinese world order with other small nations. And also, I think the world order that is being shaped outside China, or just say in the poor countries, they are quite open to China, and they also see the Chinese model of communism or authoritarianism as some kind of panacea for development, or some kind of solution for their problems. So that's another dangerous trend that it is setting into. So we have to really wait and see how it's going to shape. But COVID in itself, just say it's not going to cost a huge low blow and burden to Chinese global order or established international system of Chinese vision.
But there are growing developments. Like there's a new information circulating around that says COVID
Right.
is lab made. But do you think if that turns out to be true, do you think countries will rally against
Uh,
China?
I mean, I honestly think like there's been a lot of arguments coming up in the recent weeks, especially with scholars like Nicholas Wade, saying how this might be a lab leak virus. So in that context, probably it's gonna impact China, and also more than China, you can say it's gonna impact CPC, the Communist Party of China, and its credibility that it holds internationally and locally too, because but at the end of the day, the question goes: would you blame China for this whole thing? I mean, because US has also been a significant contributor. The US scientists have been a few significant contributors to these lab-made experiments. The Wuhan virology lab, which also apparently was or allegedly dealing with the coronavirus thing. Um, Fauci happens to be one of the lead funders too. So I don't know if China can be solely held responsible. And a lot of virologists call this a gain on experiment, gain on experiment, because this is what they thought, like having a dangerous virus would prevent another SARS outbreak or another MERS outbreak. But at the end of the day, it has probably unfolded into a lot more disaster that they anticipated it to be. So it has to be questioned whether China will alone be held responsible. I mean, yes, probably because it's run by an authoritative government which never wanted this information to go out, if this happens to be true. But again, as I said, like materially a lot of small countries are being dependent on China. And especially when you see small countries like, the African countries, the fragile democracies, um, where COVID outbreak has just broadened the division between the rich and the poor. um, and one social class to the other, one ethnicity to the other. So a lot of democracies are going to find some kind of short solution to this, and probably they would still continue to see China as a solution, because China, being authoritative as it is, it's still going to bring in some reforms that's going to minimize the diversion that's been happening within its own country. So it's going to stand as a donor in itself, and rest of the our democracies are still in shatters because of COVID. So it's still going to be a donor. It's still going to materially invest a lot in these countries. And and these countries, again known for their non-democratic norms, especially by the West, they still be depleted from their rightful funding. But we need to see how this is going to turn, because yesterday itself we had the G7 meeting where the countries said we are going to have a counter project to the Belt and Road investments coming up. But how much of it would be pragmatic, how much of it would be beneficial on the ground, and how much of it would be actually benefiting the poor countries is again a question to us. So I think China's influence materially is also going to stay in for a while. COVID has impacted, but it has impacted everyone equally, or probably um, more harsh to smaller countries than to the bigger countries. So we need to watch and see how it's going to unfold in the coming days.
Yeah, and the One Belt One Road initiative, it's
Right.
been around for a long time. How do you say it panning out? Like, is it fulfilling its destiny?
Okay. The One Belt One Road initiative, or just say Belt and Road initiative, that's been called now. For me, I personally think it was a means to provide employment to the Chinese. They have a booming economy. They have a huge labor force to employ. So they just take an example from the CPEC project that's been running in China. That's the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor that's been running through whole Pakistan. So one thing you get to notice is the Chinese companies are providing them a loan, or just say the Chinese government is providing Pakistan a loan, and these loans, they come at an interest rate. So what happens is there's a term and condition that the labor should be from China, and also the infrastructure that unfolds has to come from China, and also the machinery and the raw inputs that has also to come to China. So in a way, Pakistan is just taking a loan and is also paying interest on it, while China is boosting its economy. It's producing its hard materials, it's providing its raw materials, it continues to supply its infrastructure, it continues to employ its labor. So who is under loss is a mass speculation here, and I think the question is itself a bit clear. It is unfolding in some ways. China has taken a dangerous turn in Hambantota, port, the port in Sri Lanka. There's a lot of speculations about debt trap going on, and a lot of concerns have been emerging, like how is this BRI, or just say the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, is going to impact the rest of democracies in itself and the rest of the world. Now another project you probably need to see is what's happening in Nepal. So there's this railway connectivity that extends from China uh, to Lumbini, and Lumbini is like literally in the borders of India and Nepal. So that's also a geostrategic threat rather than just an economic investment itself. And it's also noted to see how long can these small countries yield to China, or just say yield to Chinese demands of taking in more money and unable to repay it. So it's a question we need to consider in the coming days. And also, I think, yeah, it's succeeding in what it started, but now there's a rising speculation within the BRI, and there is also rising speculation from the small countries. So now they're gonna play a bit of cards from here and there too. But yeah, it's a thing to watch.
Yeah. And you have been researching a lot lately about
Yes,
Kashmir
yes.
and Afghanistan, right? So it's been almost 2 years that post Article
Right.
370 revocation. So how are the situations in the valley
Well,
now?
it's passively peace. That's what I would put it. Kashmir has been in a very passive peace. It has been a passive peace states for a lot of time. Remember, there's a difference between active peace and passive peace. In passive peace, you know that there's a huge difference. You know that there is a potentiality for the violence to break out, but you still don't know when. There's still that us and them differences. There's still that, like we don't like them, they don't like us. We have our political or affiliations, ideological affiliations, but we are waiting for the right time to strike, or we are waiting for the right grievance where we can politicize this whole context. um, so I see that happening in Kashmir. Article 370 has been, revoked, and then Kashmir has lost its special status. It has, in a way, broadened the us and them divide that has existed then. But it has also provided a new opportunity for the government to, rush in investments, um, and also integrate them towards the nation. But this should have been done in a more, how do you say, in a more of uh, accelerated way. But there's not a lot of progress that you see, at least in economic investments that's coming in. There's a bit of speculation about the same demographic changes that Kashmiris have expressed. And now a lot of people are complaining that earlier, the secretariat or the cabinet was filled with a lot of Muslims, Kashmiri Muslims per se, and now it's being filled with, the Hindus, the Jammu Hindus, or etc., etc. So that's another difference that they're spotting in. Economically, there's not a big change, as I stressed, but again, stone pelting has been on a massive decline. It's like 2020 saw like 87% of stone pelting decline in Kashmir, which is an interesting development. And also the army is putting in a lot of efforts to build a bridge between India and Kashmir. A lot of Kashmiris, especially youths, had been radicalized, or say been prompted in a way to see the army as someone who is from the other country. The army is someone who's only gonna, who's only stopping them from achieving what the Kashmiris want. But now the army is building an extra bridge. It's putting in extra amount of efforts. It's been building schools. It's been providing basic infrastructure, health facilities, and a lot of free health care infrastructure. And also with COVID, it has been rushing in a lot of emergency supplies, food, water, medicine. Another interesting point, it has for the first time started interacting with the locals, like face to face. That is a very interesting development because it has never happened before. And I think the army is putting in massive efforts to build a bridge. But as I said, like, army solution cannot be the only solution. Kashmir needs a political solution too, and Indian Army has emphasized on this for a long, long time. So we also need to see what's happening in Kashmir after Article 370. The national conference, the PDP have all, like, the leaders have all declined, and they've said we are not going to participate in these upcoming elections for the district development councils, because they say it's below our dignity to do so. And the DDC elections for the first time have been held in Kashmir, and it's again a very new opportunity for a lot of people to bring in local development for the first time. But yeah, DDC people have again shown out a bit of their unhappiness, or or not having a lot of jurisdiction and powers over economic development, or say bringing in investments. Another interesting factor is militancy is still on the rise. So in the year 2018, we had over 200 plus local recruits. Now we see around 160, which is not a massive decline, to be honest. That the actual belief was that Article 370 will curb out militancy. There's still growing militancy, and we see a new class of militancy emerging. That's something called like the Resistance Front, the People's Anti-Fascist Front. All these militants, or just say terror organization, are in a way related to Pakistan, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and the Hizbul Mujahideen. And the traditional militant outfits are being a bit silent right now, considering the FATF regulations on Pakistan, and and how Pakistan is being placed in a very limelight of saying that it has been sponsoring terrorism for a long time. So it's they're using a new tactic where they call out secularism and the Resistance Front. You see these names, this Resistance Front, the People's Anti-Fascist Front, they don't appeal to a religion. Okay, they show themselves as secular. So this is where the new trend is coming in. And they've also been targeting a lot of local politicians, which is again a dangerous trend, because for now we don't have any middlemen that used to exist before in the state. The middlemen, traditional politicians who could provide the narratives and make sure that the bridge is built between India and Kashmir. Now we have only district development council leaders, and these leaders, if they are being targeted as they are now by the militant organizations, it's gonna destroy the bridge that we're at least trying to build. and it's also going to send a negative message to a lot of people who are even willing to contest in these elections, saying that we are not probably as safe as we think that DDCs could be. So yeah, I mean, Article 370 has provided an opportunity too, which I think is heading to some good direction, as I said, like stone pelting. But again, at the same point of time, it's still a lot more to do even after 2 years of Article 370.
Yeah, and interesting. You said a couple of things about militancy in the valley, right? Can you elaborate on that? Like, are there any new developments
Right.
in the
Right.
militancy?
I mean, there's a lot of new development happening in militancy, but again, the social media restrictions have been taken off. Right. There's this there's this emerging anxiety that it can be misused again. And the another factor that we also need to notice is like India has strengthened its anti-infiltration grid on the borders. So that means a lot of infiltration that used to happen from Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Uh, has to an extent bit reduced right now, right? Because of the anti-infiltration grid and also the counter-insurgency operations that the army and the CRPF and the police forces have been taking in a joint manner. Uh, it is having some impact on the ground of insurgency itself, but the insurgency in itself is not dead, right? They're just killing the militants, and the militant idea is not dead. The militant idea is emerging from the social media sphere, which has been a key of concern since 2014 and since 2016, when Burhan Wani was killed. It's still ongoing. It's still a huge concern. And what's interesting is now, since the infiltration has reduced a lot from Pakistan, which apparently happens also can be a Pakistani strategy. An alternative that's emerging is the social media. Earlier, social media was just used to radicalize people, just used to have them on the board and then just get them to cross over POK and then let them back to India. But now, or mobilize them to pelt stones. Now, social media is also being used to train soldiers. It's also being used to militants. It is also being used to communicate over where to supply this bomb, where to supply this uh, IED, where to supply weapons to so and so militants or so and so organization. So this is a new phase of militancy where you see um, the weapons, the training, everything is happening on a social media sphere. But this also has a impact that a lot of insurgents, or just say militants, are not that strengthened as they used to be before, because most of these happen to be on social media, and it's just that they are not as disastrous, or just say as as battle hardened as the previous fighters were. But what it causes as a major concern is these are Indians. So these are local militants. So that's what causes major concern, because eliminating a local militant is far more dangerous to the social fabric of India, rather than eliminating a Pakistani terrorist, or just say an Afghani terrorist who has entered into India.
But yeah, and also you've been doing a lot of
Right.
research about Afghanistan. So what's happening there right
Right.
now?
So Afghanistan is again on the news, back to being chaotic. A lot of bomb blasts. If you have heard the news, like a lot of school children are being killed. A lot of these people. The Taliban is again denying all the allegations of being under the watch of eliminating the government forces or anything as such. But Afghanistan, to be honest, can never be separated from the Indo-Pak factor, right? The US came in, the great game began, the great game continues to happen, the great power politics is still happening, and a lot of countries are still involved. But the point is, India, Pakistan relations are also hugely dependent on, or say India Pakistan relations are hugely impacting Afghanistan too, right? So Afghanistan is also a danger to Pakistan, as India is. So just not say absolute threat, but a relative threat to Pakistan is Afghanistan. Afghanistan has, like, it has a bit of how do you say, the borders that have not been demarcated, or the borders that it claims to be of its, from the Pakistani territories, the where a lot of Pashtun tribes live in. And that is the reason why Pakistan has always been seeing Afghanistan as a state where it has to instill a puppet government. If failing to do so, if there is a government which is against Pakistan, which is even, let's say, the least friendly to India, or at least neutral to India, they're going to find themselves in danger. Um, So that's the reason why Pakistan has always been promoting radicalization, or just say pushing Taliban, which happens to be its proxy at a point of time in Afghanistan. And the same situation is unfolding. The US troops are withdrawing. The NATO's gonna leave Afghanistan by September, and what's happening? What's being left behind is the Afghan forces and the Taliban. The Afghan forces are unfortunately no match to the Taliban's military might and supremacy. um, so it's a major cause of concern for India too, and also for Pakistan is trying to push hard Taliban to at least form a government, or if not say an absolute government in Afghanistan, but at least a power shared government in Afghanistan, so that they can have some military leverage, and they can also have some, some kind of non hostile government in Afghanistan to take over their, ruckus.
And what does it mean for India, all these
Right.
developments?
So I mean, there's a complicated relationship between India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So Afghanistan has been, like, as I said, it's been perceived as a threat to Pakistan. Um, so there's always been a wish and will to have a puppet leader installed. So what happened in the meanwhile, when the Soviets invaded when the USSR invaded Afghanistan? Um, the US was very skeptical of what's going to happen next. Are the Soviet troops going to march to Pakistan? Are they going to catch hold of Pakistan? And what happens if they do so? Because the US is going to lose its only sole ally in South Asia, because India was still a non-aligned country at that point of time. So the US, the CIA, and the ISI from Pakistan, they rather, formed a kind of conglomerate where they started funding a lot of jihadis, battle hardened fighters, a lot of jihadis, and a lot of these jihadis came from the Pashtun region of Pakistan, which also happens to be the regions where Pashtuns live. And Pashtuns are a common tribe that you find on the border side, or the common ethnic group that you find on the border sides of Afghanistan and Pakistan too. So a lot of these people were being sent to, Afghanistan to fight as battle hardened fighters. And at this point of time, they were called as Mujahideen. Right? They were not Taliban yet. So a lot of groups happened to be Mujahideen groups, out of which Taliban was just one group. A lot of funding came in from US arms funds. A lot of funding came in from Saudi. A lot of arms went from Pakistan too. And this was the whole strategy, was to defeat Soviet Union, and they were successful in whatever aim they had intended to do so. And as soon as the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan, the US just, threw its arms away and said, okay, now that the Soviets are gone, like, we don't have a lot more to do in the Afghanistan region, so let's just withdraw. And this caused a huge opportunity for Pakistan, because one, it deviated all its battle hardened fighters from Afghanistan to Kashmir. Right. So remember the dates: 1989, where the USSR withdrew, and 1989, when the Kashmir insurgency hit its very peak. This was the year when Kashmir insurgency was at peak. Uh, so a lot of battle hardened fighters from Afghanistan started moving into Kashmir, and what happened more was these arms and ammunition that were reserved for Taliban, that were reserved for the Mujahideens, were being sent to a lot of fighters, or just say secessionists, like the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front and other Kashmiri youth who wanted to, separate from the Indian Union. A lot of them were being funded with this, and by the time Taliban came into existence by 1994, a lot of these so there was a bitter civil war, and Taliban took over the Afghan remains, and it formed itself into an Islamic emirate. So what happened once the successful government was established? There was a lot of, just say surplus fighters, right? They were again deviated to Kashmir, and these were all more trained in the, guerrilla warfare, more trained in their horrible way of living, with the meager food, with meager water supply, but with clever mind of inducing hard damage to the state forces or to the any army, be it the Afghan, and now it was the Indian army. So by 1994, when India counterinsurgency was at its peak, a lot of Kashmiris withdrew themselves from supporting the Kashmiri militants. They said, supporting militant violence was a backfire to us, and it has been harming us more than it has been doing us good. So we are gonna, partially withdraw from whatever violence we have been causing. So a lot of Kashmiris turned not hostile, but yeah, they turned away from militancy. And at the same point of time, these fighters, the jihadis that came from the Taliban fighters that came from Afghanistan and were trained in Pakistan, were from a different school of thought. They were Wahhabis, they were Deobandis, and they were very, very, very alien to the Kashmiri culture. And the Kashmiri culture, just say, like, the way they treated others Kashmiris was not really welcome by the Kashmiris themselves. So they, you know closed the doors for all these fighters, so they had no local legitimacy. Yet they started a phase called the Fidain phase. A lot of key targets were being, a lot of Indian counterinsurgent force were being killed, a lot of Indian army buildings were targeted. The parliament bombings at the same the parliament attack at the same point of time, the attack on Jammu Kashmir Assembly. So all these were a part of Fidain phase, where you see a lot of battle hardened fighters from Pakistan and Afghanistan moving into India and targeting our key infrastructure, because that's what they were trained in being, targeting key infrastructure. And this has apparently caused a lot of anxiety in India, considering what's going to happen next if Taliban comes to rule in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, because Taliban has been more of a proxy to Pakistan than anything else. So at this point of time, maybe a bit of dynamics are changing here and there, give and take, but yet Taliban seems to be a huge cause of concern. And what happens, another thing is, when Taliban has succeeded in defeating the Soviets and also the USA right now, because they are being withdrawn, a lot of psychologically it impacts a lot of Kashmiris who have now come to believe that it's quite impossible, or it's a horrendous task to defeat the Indian forces, or to withdraw from the Indian Union. So now they get some kind of psychological backing, saying that, oh, since the Taliban has done it, it has defeated the global power, or the United States, and also the global power Soviet Russia. So we can still take on India. It's not going to be a big task as we presume it to be. So it's going to psychologically feed them. And another thing that you need to know is, again, the militants, eliminating militants is not the elimination of militancy. A lot of ideas, a lot of tactics are going to flow from Taliban to Kashmir. Like Talibani fighters, the way they took off their warfare, the way the arms they used, the weapons they used. So Taliban had like in the recent times, Taliban had a recent history of using sticky bombs, these bombs which were stuck into vehicles without any detection, and they were being blown off. Now they're being detected in Kashmir for the past 1.5 year, after abrogation of Article 370. And then we also see Taliban, which adopted itself to the what do you say, the drone warfare, uh, the uh, the UAVs. Now we see quite a few drones supplying in weapons to a lot of Kashmiri insurgents within the Kashmiri border. So a lot of drones are moving from Pakistan to Kashmir. So this is another trend that we always have to keep a watch on, because it's just not material support, but it's also have to be the technological and the ideological support and the psychological support that these people are going to get from Afghanistan. But another final, I think probably important point would be, if Taliban happens to be on a complete control in Afghanistan, I think it's still going to pave a way for Pakistan to push their organizations, that's the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed and other terrorist organizations, into Afghan borders. Because Taliban is opaque by itself, right? It's not going to open up to the Western world orders quite openly, and it's not going to be as transparent as it presumes it to be, or as it's showing it to be. So if this happens, then a lot of LET and JEM fighters will move into Afghanistan, then move to Kashmir, which is again a kind of situation that India has been avoiding or intending to avoid to some point of time, because these LET and JEM fighters were under tremendous pressure by the Pakistani government since the FATF regulations, or the Indian coalition against terrorism. But now we see a lot of changes. If Taliban succeeds, then these organizations are going to move there, and again there might be a bit of material support flowing in from Taliban, from Afghanistan to Kashmir. Yes, our infiltration grid has been strengthened, our global power has been strengthened since what it was in 1989. But as I said, in 1989, it was just material power and a bit of ideological power. Now we see social media everywhere. And now we have a more of a threat from ideology, as well as physical, as well as psychological threats. So that's one thing why I see, Afghanistan being a core issue for Kashmir conflict for now. And the Indian government has been acting on this quite for a past few weeks. We have been seeing that um, our Minister of External Affairs has met, the group of Taliban, and then we have had some kind of interactions, like the non-pro Pakistani Taliban yet, but we haven't spoken to the pro Pakistan Taliban because we know it's still not going to be a trustworthy, or it's not going to be a valuable investment for now.
And yes, it's been it's been great having you on the podcast. And I believe you're coming up with your new website, right? Tell us more
Right.
about that.
I mean, I'm just trying to adopt myself to a more digital world, like rest of the other scholars and other people are doing. So I'm just uploading all my regular writings and all my whatever interviews I've attended, like one of yours, which I'm privileged to be on the second time, and then I have a few long form writings. Apparently on Kashmir, one is on Kashmir, two are on Kashmir, and then one happens to be on the China's militarization program. So a lot of articles that I generally write for the digital formats and in the print format will be presented in the website, and then also my contact address for anyone anytime to contact me. Happy to interact with students or with anyone else. So that's gonna happen, and then probably I'm also gonna use it to display my blog as well. I write quite a few personal things rather than professional things in my blog, so and I want people to read it, so yeah, and I think that would feature a lot of them
And yeah, all the links to the website and the blog will be given in the
as early as
description.
possible.
And thank you, Aditya, for doing this. Yeah. And
Thank you so
thank you,
much,
Aditya,
Manish, for
for
having
doing
me. It was
this.
great talking to you.